These organisms are being shattered by our electronic signals. When you approach a frequency to which they are vulnerable, they begin to slow down, then they stop, and then they begin to disintegrate within about 3 minutes. We now know that cancer is vulnerable between the frequencies of 100,000 hertz and 300,000 hertz. So now we attack leukemia cells.
No matter how I look at it, how much research I do, I keep coming back to one guy that stands head and shoulders above all other researchers and inventors of, I don't know, for how many centuries. And that guy's name is Nikola Tesla. He says, if you want to find out the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Modern science tells us that we live in an electromagnetic universe. Everything spins and vibrates. I'd like to correct that. I'd like to say that it's not an electromagnetic universe, it's a magneto-electric universe. It's a very big difference between the two. And again, it's a small little subtlety, but it's a very important subtlety, because magnetism is a thing that rules the universe, not electricity. Sound, magneticism, electricity. And you'll see how this chain reaction causes everything that we observe when we look up at the night sky or the nature around us. Everything in creation spins and vibrates. Everything has its own prime resonance frequency. Everything. And this is why once we can identify a prime resonance frequency of a bacterium or an atom or whatever it is, or a soccer field, we can then manipulate that object with its prime resonance frequency. Sound and resonance, common links of creation and religion. In Christianity, it's the word. In Hinduism, it's Om. The Egyptians believed the universe was sung into creation, and the original people of Australia believed that the world was created with 3 sacred songs. And then we have the phenomenal similarities between the 6 days of creation in Christianity and the word that created everything, the 6 aspects of Om, and the 6 aspects of the all-seeing eye of Horus, and you start seeing the connections between all these ancient cultures and the creation stories. And then the creation stories get even more interesting when you read the Hindu creation story. It says, everything was so peaceful and silent that Vishnu slept undisturbed by dreams or motion. From the depths, a humming sound began to tremble. It grew and spread, filling the emptiness and throbbing with energy. The night had ended. Vishnu awoke. That's just a little more dramatic version of saying God said, let there be light. Same thing. It's just great when you start seeing these connections. Sound is a source of all creation. Sound and resonance is responsible for everything. This is the most basic, fundamental demonstration how sound and resonance manifests into physical form. And I just cannot get enough of it. I can watch it millions of times. Every frequency has its own specific shape, a prime resonance frequency. Are you only looking at a 2-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional effect? And this is just in the spectrum that we can hear. You can imagine in the low frequencies that we can't hear, it has the same effect. The higher the frequency, the more complex the shapes. The lower the frequency, the more basic and the larger the shapes. Okay, so the original people of Australia have a creation story that says time began when the supernatural beings awoke and broke through the surface of the earth. So imagine the surface of the earth being something like this, that metal plate being the surface of the earth. And the supernatural beings broke through the surface of the earth, and they created the surface of the earth with 3 sacred songs. This is from Hans Jenny's brilliant video, Cymatics. This is powder on a metal plate. It's not a liquid or a jelly, it's powder. You can see landscapes being formed here over extended periods of time. So it's interesting that I link this to the Aboriginal people or original people of Australia and the 3 sacred songs, and it's very similar to this picture that I took from an aeroplane flying over Western Australia. And you can start seeing how the kind of landscape would have been formed from the cymatics of the sound. And some of these pictures, the images of this CymaScope images, tell us that it was these sounds, the images of the sound, that actually inspired religious symbols. That beautiful cross in a circle at the center of some of these cymatic photographs give us a very clear indication that the creators of the religious symbols knew exactly what they were talking about, that the source of creation is sound itself. Sound creates light. It's very obvious. We know that God said, "Let there be light," and you can do this yourself by attaching a speaker to an LED light and see what happens. Royal Raymond Rife, you should know by now, that cured the man that found the cure for all disease with sound and resonance. They were converted to electric impulses. And right here in Sedona, in a library in Sedona, is his handwritten manuscript that you can read all his handwritten frequencies that he wrote down for cures for all the disease. Lakovsky, the multiple wave oscillator, that has got an incredible record of curing all kinds of diseases, including cancers. And more recently, Anthony Holland, who in a TED talk in 2011 shows how he cures cancer with sound frequencies. Unfortunately, Anthony Holland thought he'd become famous, and since then we've not heard anything of him. He sort of disappeared.
These organisms are being shattered by our electronic signals. This is a harmless organism, almost friendly, a little blepharisma. And normally they're very fast swimmers, but when you approach a frequency to which they are vulnerable, they begin to slow down, then they stop, and then they begin to disintegrate within about 3 minutes. We now know that cancer is vulnerable between the frequencies of 100,000 hertz and 300,000 hertz. So now we attack leukemia cells. Leukemia cell number 1 tries to grow a copy of itself, but the new cell is shattered into dozens of fragments and scattered across the slide. Leukemia cell number 2 then hyperinflates and also dies. Leukemia cell number 3 then tries to make another cancer cell. The new cell is shattered and the original cell dies.
So what most people don't know is, remember, sound, God said, "Let there be light." So it's sound, moving toroidal fields create magnetic fields, which are toroidal fields as well, and moving magnetic fields create electricity. That's the sequence of events. But this tells us that because sound creates magnetic fields, it means everything must have a must be magnetic in some sort, and in some sort of way. And if it's not, there's a very specific reason why it's not magnetic. So here's an example. This blew my mind. This is such an important little video that will change your perception of what our universe or what our reality around us is, and how important a role magnetism plays in everything that surrounds us.
I think of water as being magnetic, but it is, and so are graphite, aluminum, and glass. This is a new and different category of magnetism called either para or diamagnetism. Aluminum is a good example of a paramagnet. And so is oxygen, which is attracted to magnets. Here, I have a few milliliters of liquid oxygen, which sticks to the magnet. Gadolinium oxide and cupric sulfate are good examples of paramagnetic substances. Cupric sulfate is a salt that can be picked up by a magnet. Diamagnetic materials are exactly the opposite of paramagnetic. They are always repulsed. This specially made pyrolytic graphite is repelled by a magnetic field. Graphite is repelled by a magnet, always, both by the north and south end.
Kids from college here in the USA that created a sound fire extinguisher.
Here we're just going to test out our device that we use that uses sound frequencies to extinguish flames.
I see this device being applied to a lot of things. First off, I think in the kitchen, it could be on top of a stovetop. But eventually I'd like to see this applied to maybe swarm robotics where it'd be attached to a drone, and that would be applied to forest fires or even building fires where you wouldn't want to sacrifice human life.
You'd expect that to be picked up by the fire brigades, wouldn't you? No way, they're not going to do that. Imagine a big building on fire, just pull up a couple of fire trucks, blast it with sound, and fire is out. That's too easy. Can't do that. We need people to get injured and hurt so we can get insurance claims, we can have hospitals to work, we get the drug companies, everything's got to work. We got to get the corporate thing to function. We can't just solve the problem. It's not going to work for us. Right? Sound creates volcanoes. Imagine, the earth is ringing like a bell all the time. So these frequencies keep coming out of the earth all the time. What do you think creates the volcanoes? What creates the heat underground that creates the volcanoes?
We've come accustomed to seeing graphs like this. This depicts sound waves as moving in a two-dimensional pattern. Or here, like a sine wave, which does help us mathematically, but is not a realistic depiction of sound. This would be a more realistic depiction, showing interference from all angles.
And this is what happens when you crank it up.
High intensity, we can do something sort of like this.
So now you can see how we can manifest things. We become creators and can manifest anything with sound. And this is why we now know that sound is the ultimate source of free energy. And Nikola Tesla knew this. He knew that the earth rings like a bell, and he used the sound of the earth because it constantly rings, it never stops. He used it as a source of energy to create his free energy device. And this is where we realize that sound and magneticism is inextricably connected. It's sound that creates magnetic fields, and moving magnetic fields create electricity. It's in that order that creation seems to happen. So we don't live in an electromagnetic universe, we live in a magneto-electric universe. Sound creates hurricanes. There are two guys in 2003 that lodged a patent to create hurricanes out of sound, believe it or not. And I believe they were granted their patent to create hurricanes. And maybe this is how they create the weather for us, without us even realizing it.